I've got lots of slides and I'm going to be kind of zipping through them, but if you can get the recording later, you can roll back and see anything you missed, because I'm not going to pause on anything too long to keep things moving. This morning, we're going to be talking about our fuel management programs, starting with the Vegetation Management Program, our oldest program. We'll talk about our new Cal VTP, the Vegetation Treatment Plan. We'll talk about some other projects and the CEQA or NEPA documentation that goes along with those. For burning that private landowners are going to do themselves, we'll talk about LE 5 and 7 permits and the LE 8 conditions that go with those. And then we'll brush a little bit on grant programs, some other sources for work for private lands, whether it's climate change initiative, forest health grants, urban and community forestry, fire prevention, which you might see through the Fire Safe Council or through the Resource Conservation District, CFIP, which is a California Forest Improvement Program, grants for forestry on qualifying lands, and volunteer assistance. So the Vegetation Management Program came from Senate Bill 1704 and signed into law by Governor Brown in his first round in 1980. The documentation that came along with that setting out the program was an EIR, or chaparral management, in 1981. That term selected by the governor's office, although it was meant to include all shrub formations, did not address timberland burning. The program focuses on prescribed fire as a major tool for management of that. And again, the EIR was certified in 1981. The VMP allows the state to get into an agreement, a RM75 contract, which can last up to 10 years with the landowner. That allows us to take on all or partial liability for the prescribed fire and project activities. That allows vegetation treatments on private property across California with mechanical and hand crew treatments, including broadcast burning and pile burning for fuel reduction. If we work within the EIR, there are no fees from the Department of Fish and Wildlife for work around habitats, and the landowner maintains input over objectives for burning and vegetation modification. Lots of moving parts in a vegetation management plan. As I mentioned, the contract agreement that is the hold harmless and permissions for us. The cost analysis and apportionment, we estimate how much it's going to cost, analyze that, and then we need to apportion who's getting the different benefits along, and we'll have a screen on that coming up. We prepare a burn plan and a prescription, kind of our recipe for a fire. We model the fire through a computer program called Behave that will allow us to estimate what kind of fire we're going to get with given prescription conditions. We include a vicinity map that might have the local towns, highways, rivers, just to orient people generally where the project is. And then at a higher scale, larger scale, we have a project map that shows details of the project. We also need parcel maps that show who owns what portions of our project. We prepare an incident action plan that details who's going to be doing what, particularly during the fire, but we might also have an incident action plan for the preparation of or treatments prior to a fire. We prepare a smoke management plan, which Dave is going to talk more about after. A public information plan so that when we start putting smoke in the air, we don't surprise anybody. We don't like surprises in the fire business. We'll include aerial imagery so we can see the different vegetation, the fuels out there, and then some topography. We do a soil survey analysis, and that goes into helping us rate the erosion hazard. We estimate the values at risk, whether it's a pile of hay or barns or residences or nearby factory or whatever the values at risk are around the project area. We'll include agency letters, whether that's from the Board of Supervisors or the Department of Fish and Wildlife, anybody supporting our project, include those in our package. We go through an environmental checklist where we check to see if any of the about 20 resources we analyze more closely are going to be affected. We review the California Natural Diversity Database for rare, threatened, endangered species that might be sensitive to our actions. We prepare a confidential archaeology report that is not a public document, but it helps us protect any cultural resources that are out on the project area. We go through a go, no-go checklist, checking that all our lights are green before we proceed, and wrapping up with a completion report. Broad goals of the Vegetation Management Plan is reduction of conflagration fires. If you were a Mariposa County resident, in 2017, we burned 10% of our county. 2018, again, we burned 10% of our county. Those are the types of fires we refer to, that big word, fires. Another broad goal, optimization of soil and water productivity, and protection and improvement of the plants and animals that are out in the area and their habitats. Sub-goals of that, increasing public safety, reducing our overall suppression costs, improving our water quality and increasing our water quantity, our water yield off of the project area, decreasing potential for flooding and siltation. Back in the day, the mountaintops washed down to the valley bottom, gave them their ag soils. Now we don't want all of that siltation landing up down in Lake McClure. Another sub-goal to improve soil productivity and decrease erosion, improve wildlife and fisheries habitats, improve oak woodlands, establish and maintain desired plant communities, propagate fire-dependent habitats for listed species, improve air quality over the long term. If we put up smoke in a controlled manner on a burn day when we've got good mixing and transport, that can be a lot better than having a conflagration fire when we're under high pressure and that dome of smoke just presses down on all of our residents. Improving forage and browse, sorry for the spelling there, for livestock, increasing opportunities for recreation and improving scenic vistas, decreasing risk to firefighters and other responders during our wildland fire response, providing training opportunities for personnel and incident organization, operations, fire behavior, firing, and weather influences. The BMP is a cost share program, as I mentioned, for our apportionment. We have to analyze these 7 factors. How much of fire hazard reduction is a benefit to the property owner? How much of fire hazard reduction is a benefit to the people of the state of California? Again, with water yields, what increased water is going to be used on the property? What's going to be running off and benefiting statewide? Are we stabilizing our watershed, not only within the project area, but if we're working in the upper portion of the watershed, not sending down our topsoil to them, where it's just going to reduce storage capacity in a reservoir? Are we going to be improving wildlife habitat improvement, whether it is on the property if there's a hunting club, or whether it's area where grazing is important for winter herds that supports the rest of the state. Fisheries, whether there's stocked or ponds or even wild habitat on the project, or if we're just protecting the upper watershed for fisheries downstream. Air quality improvement, most of those benefit people statewide. And then if we're going to be benefiting range, that's typically going to be a better benefit for the property owner. We'll go through these bubbles kind of individually, but just so you can get an idea of how the project flows. Some of the steps in the middle aren't necessarily in a certain order, but having them in a flow helps us tick them off as we go. And then even after approval, we've got additional components of the projects that have to be sequenced. We do have a brand new field guide just posted yesterday, revised in April, for Vegetation Management Program. In our project guide, directs that our personnel start by meeting with the landowner, touring the property, and making a determination about project feasibility. We identify the project limits, if there's portions of the property that are suitable or not suitable, and then whether those lands fall within our treatable landscape that was analyzed in our EIR. We look at the assessor's parcel map, get the parcel numbers so we know who owns which parcels, and then make sure the zoning is appropriate for our treatments. And then check with the landowners to see if they have knowledge of cultural or historic resources or wildlife use also. The VMP coordinator facilitates other agency input, such as working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to protect not only the plants and animals that might be rare or threatened, but also their habitats. And then if we can time the season of the burn to avoid such things as disturbing nesting or maternal colonies, wait for fledging, things like that. We will hear from Dave later about how we work with our local air pollution control district. We prepare the project plan based on environmental concerns and, of course, the landowner's objectives. We estimate our costs. We talked about the apportionment and prepare our incident action plan. We might start with a license for and a hold harmless agreement for the landowner to allow us out to do initial inspections before, but then we do the formal RM75 contract agreement. The VMP coordinator sends our package to region and reviewed and approved depending on the dollar estimates. The work might be approved in region, might have to go to Sacramento, or at a certain dollar threshold actually has to leave the Department of Forestry and be approved by the governor's cabinet outside of our department. Ahead of our ignition, we prepare a form called the FC 400 to region, letting them know that we're going to be putting fire on the ground. We will hear more from Dave about our air quality, but we want to get our smoke plan into PFERS at least 2 weeks in advance and get going with our 72-hour go, no go forecast for smoke conditions at the time of our planned fire. And then if we have a permit fee, make sure that's paid. Proper notifications, as I said, we don't like any surprises, so notifying our region, local media, our cooperators in law enforcement, and getting a spot forecast for the burn day. We conduct the project and complete our project completion report. Some repetition here, but there's also some new information. So again, starting with a site visit with the landowner or landowners, feasible project moving forward. If there's any topographic ownership or resource protection issues that have to be outside the project, get that started early. Again, working with the landowners for their local knowledge of biological, cultural, historic resources. And if they've burned the property in the past, if they've been out there for generations and know the wind patterns in their particular lands, then that's always something we want to make sure our incident commander knows about, so there's no surprises when local knowledge could have helped us. Develop a preliminary agreement with the landowner on division of labor. It's common that the landowner might pay for the Archaeological Information Center checks or provide food for the crews or put in much or all of the fire control lines. And then we continue with the environmental review. Discussion on some advantages and to follow disadvantages of the contract. So here are advantages. The Department of Forestry and Fire Protection agrees to indemnify and hold harmless the cooperator, the landowner, against liabilities for damages of any nature arising out of the performance of the prescribed burning contract, and also cooperators that are working with us. And the State Attorney General's Office provides counsel for legal actions that could come out of this project. Our VMP projects are affordable to landowners and they can last up to 10 years, which helps us get good work done. Some disadvantages: our capacity as an agency is limited. We have more people requesting burns and projects than we can accommodate. Our projects are dependent on weather and other factors, and there's no guarantee that we'll have a good burn window and crews and equipment available within the life of the contract. it's certainly our intention. Preparation time can be lengthy. We just got our Greeley Hill Vegetation Management Plan signed. That was initiated back in the 1990s, and 5 foresters from MMU have worked on that, just got it signed, so ready to burn out in North County. Our landowners must agree to allow government access out to the property, and currently I'm covering VMP coordinator. I'm the forest practice forester here in the unit, so me doing job sharing also limits our capacity. So I talked about a go, no go checklist, making sure that all of our lights are green before we go through and put fire on the ground. If we do have something that comes up, a yellow warning light in our dash, we do have an opportunity to change our plan. And if we get all our lights green, then we can continue with approval of our unit chief or duty chief. And we don't have to have that in writing at time of ignition. We can just document that's radio, phone, or personal contact. So landowners do have other options for reducing wildland vegetation and the hazard associated with that. If their objectives are fuel reduction, hazard abatement, habitat improvement, or maintenance of previously treated areas, they can choose to cut, pile, and burn vegetation on their own. And so in addition to the typical pile burning permit that people get, not at the station this year, but we're doing those online remotely this year. But in addition to those, we have the LE7 burns, which are where the landowner conducts the burn themselves. And as we've discussed, landowners can ask to be in the Vegetation Management Program or the new VTP. Here's some other tools in the toolbox. BMP, we've been talking about. Forest practice is doing some type of timber harvest on the property to treat your fuels, vegetation and your fuels. Strategic plan might be things that are included in our 5-year plan, where maybe it's part of our unit fuel break and it's going to come across or near your property. The 719, as I mentioned, the initial cooperative agreement or license for us to enter your property, do work there. Not our VMP agreement, but in some cases, the initial agreement allowing access. VTP is coming up soon. We'll talk about that. Other groups and nonprofits, or even some for-profit, you can hire a burn boss and a burn crew to come out and burn your property without involving the state. And then the 62A burn permit, which, as I mentioned, we're not writing in person at the stations this year, but we're doing those remotely. 5-minute CEQA, but we won't really take 5 minutes. The little tree down there shows some of the 20+ categories that we analyze when we're doing our CEQA clearances. CEQA is an acronym for the California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA applies when there's a project undertaken by a state agency that might cause a direct physical change in the environment, or a reasonably foreseeable indirect physical change in the environment. We have a choice of CEQA documents that are appropriate for different levels of project. There's several types of projects that have already been described and analyzed, and we have categorical exemptions for those. If it could have a significant effect, we can do a negative declaration and determine, yes, this does not fit a categorical exemption, but it will not have a significant effect. If we have a significant effect, but we can mitigate it, we can file a mitigated negative declaration. Those negative declarations do have a public comment period. And if we can't avoid significant effect, then we can do an environmental impact report. So our VMP, the Vegetation Management Program, and the upcoming VTP, Vegetation Treatment, those were filed under environmental impact reports. So those significant effects have been analyzed. So projects with, we mentioned LE7, but LE5 permits for non-conforming piles bigger than the 4x4. We might write an LE5 for project type or landscape burning, prescribed fire on the ground. You can come in, get an LE7 form, and do a prescribed burn on your own property. Now, depending on your location and the time of the year, sometimes in the wet part of winter and spring, that is not required, but in Southern California, most of the counties, and those are required by law year-round in Southern California. And in Madera County, we do ask for those plans in the winter also. But in Mariposa County, open burning season, you can light what you can control. You also need a smoke permit if you're going to be burning bigger than your 4x4 piles, and Dave's going to talk there. We might write also with that an LE8, minimum precautions for the project burning. And so if you're going to be doing some burning, we might give you some written conditions to follow. And those LE5 and 7s are non-discretionary and do not trigger a CEQA document. So here, just a quick example of our LE5 burning permit, whether that's ag or around your residence or ranch property. For prescribed burning out on the ground, LE7, and then the LE8 minimum precautions that go with that. So as I mentioned, those permits are required from May 1st until the director declares the end of hazardous fire conditions, and the unit might make a local proclamation different than statewide out in the units. And if you're going to file for those, do expect a site visit from one of us in uniform. In our MMU, we might be able to provide standby suppression resources. In other words, have an engine or a crew out observing your burn. They can assist with holding operations if they are available, but they're not committed to the burn. And so if we call medical aid or strike a wildfire nearby in the response area of that fire resource, they are going to disappear, possibly during a crunch time of your burn. Burn permits might be suspended at any time due to adverse weather conditions, adverse burning conditions, or incident activity that's drawing our resources down. A prescribed burn which goes across your control lines but stays on your property is not an escape if it can be controlled with the resources that are there on scene. Again, your local air quality management district is going to be requiring permits for broadcast burning, and we do appreciate notification even if it's open burning season. So our new VTP just certified at the end of December last year. That's a lot of words. Let's go to the quick and dirty here. It serves as our management tool to reduce risks from high vegetation fuel loads, helps to increase our pace and scale to reach the governor's goal of 500,000 treated acres per year on non-federal lands, matching up with 500,000 acres on federal lands for 1 million acres of California treated each year. Helps us increase the use of prescribed fire as a vegetation management tool and manage our forest and working lands to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing large catastrophic fires. If we can burn the finer fuels that contribute more to fire spread and leave the larger logs behind under our prescriptions, then we're going to be pumping less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And another goal, improving the ecosystem health by increasing fire on fire dependent landscapes. So other in the toolbox was fire plan projects. So what we might have on the books on the next 5 years. You can view the fire plans on the Office of State Fire Marshal website there. And other types of activities we might do, training burns under a notice of exemption if it fits one of those. VMPs, VTPs we talked about. Last year, the governor had 35 special emergency projects that he issued waivers for. We had 3 of those projects in our local MMU. That was a fuel break along Grist Road, a fuel break along Metcalf Gap Road, and our burn along Highway 41 down in Madera County. And we can also assist with operations out in the local responsibility area. Burn plan and smoke management plan, I'm not going to tread on Dave's too much, but on the prescription side, a prescription is just what are the conditions that you're going to have to introduce fire out on the landscape to yield results that you desire. So it's starting with the fuels, analyzing the fuel that's out there. How much is there? How much do you want to burn? What the weather conditions are going to be, whether that's temperature, humidity, dew point derived from humidity, wind speed and direction, probability of ignition. Think of that as if you strike 100 matches out into the field, how many of those are going to start a fire? That's our probability of ignition. Forecasts, typically we're going to use the National Weather Service out of Hanford for here and get spot forecasts. And then again, more site-specific weather and fuel and fire behavior, whether that's measured as our fire line intensity, our rate of spread, or flame length, or fire effects such as scorch. Our smoke management plan is there to help us not pump smoke down at the ground level where people are breathing to our smoke sensitive receptors, which might be our schools, our hospitals. Right now we have less focus on the schools, more on daycare, and certainly we don't want to be smoking our hospitals at this sensitive time. So having a smoke management plan helps us plan ahead of time, proper weather, proper fuel conditions to not smoke out those. Now, when you need to describe your fuels, there are some job aids available, and a lot of people choose either Anderson or Scott and Bergen's. Here's some example of some fire behavior inputs. We're going to be putting in what type of fuel and our fuel moistures, and then we can go to our job aids for fuels, and we can derive based on different winds what our rate of spread and our flame lengths are for the different fuels we expect to burn. We can get those out of those job aids, or we can do more inputs into the Behave software and giving us similar outputs, flame length, scorch height, don't know who spelled scorch there, probability of ignition, burnout time. I've mentioned environmental checklist. Here's just an example out of greenhouse gases. Are we going to have an effect? No, we're not, because in this case, the trees will be protected through prescription or avoiding trees, and only grass will be burned in the project. So just one snapshot of the more than 20 different resources we check for impacts. This is an output from our first order fire effects model, and that helps us predict what kind of emissions we're going to have, whether we're concerned about carbon dioxide emissions, our PM 2.5 respirable particles, or our PM 10, which contributes to our regional haze. We want to know ahead of time what kind of effects we're going to be having. Dave is going to talk more about PFAS, but we use that to enter our smoke management plan. I've mentioned our go, no go checklist, all green lights, test burn is successful. We can continue with our project. Just an example of a spot weather forecast there. We can choose it for the particular latitude, longitude, elevation aspect, when we're going to have our fire where, and the Weather Service will tell us what kind of weather we are likely to expect. All said and done, we file a completion report, and we will take questions later. Thank you for your sticking with me on that whirlwind tour. And I believe I stop share now.
Thank you so much, Brian. What a great presentation, and to show how important this presentation is, we have lots of questions in the Q&A session, but we'll hold those and then have them answered at the end after Dave Conway comes and does his presentation. So let me move on to the next presentation, which is going to be given by Dave Conway. He is the Environmental Health Director for Mariposa Health Department. And his presentation covers air quality permitting and health impacts of fire. Go ahead, Dave.
All right, thank you. And thanks, Brian. What a great presentation on the fire side aspects of doing a prescribed burn. What I'm going to talk about today is air district permits and some of the health effects of prescribed burning. As mentioned, my name is Dave Conway. I'm the Deputy Air Pollution Control Officer for Mariposa County Air Pollution Control District. I am also the Director of Environmental Health for the County Health and Human Services Agency Public Health Branch. First thing we need to look at is the policy implications and why we need to change policy to best protect public health. In the past, we've had a no smoke is good smoke attitude for years. We've also had 100+ years of fire suppression policies. When we add that to 14+ years of drought, add bark beetle caused die-off of hundreds of millions of trees in our area, and yeah, that was a setup for disaster. We have record-setting, stand-converting, catastrophic wildfires occurring across the state, and smoke impacts from those fires affecting millions of people. So one way of helping to reduce those catastrophic wildfires is through thoughtful and careful planned prescribed burns. When we look at wildfire versus prescribed fire smoke impacts and our ability to regulate them, it's easy to see that when you look at all of the effort that went into what Brian was talking about, prescribed fires are very heavily regulated in an effort to prevent or at least reduce smoke impacts. Whereas wildfires that are being treated as unwanted fires and being fully suppressed are not regulated in any way. The wildfire doesn't care if it's a burn day or not. It doesn't care how much wind is blowing, and they often create major smoke impacts, as we've seen over the last few years. So why does the Air District support prescribed fire? Yeah, as we said, the prescribed fires have planned ignitions with very specific boundaries. You saw in Brian's presentation that there's a lot of effort that goes into preparing a burn plan. And those fire-related prescriptions are very critical. There's oftentimes that it's a good burn day, and we at the Air District could allow burning, but for whatever reason, it's not a good day for the fire prescription. So prescribed burns get canceled all the time for those reasons, beyond the air quality reasons. There's a specific fire plan that includes a smoke management plan. And within the smoke management plan, there are typically trigger points and contingency plans that dictate what kind of actions are going to be taken if we have smoke impacts. And in some cases, those are putting in check lines in the area on a larger fire so that the fire can be slowed down and smoke production less. Other times it means full suppression of the fire. Again, permits are issued, and there are very specific conditions of approval that are added to each permit. In that way, we're able to have some control over the entire process and allow burning to take place in a way that reduces smoke impacts. And of course, there's the big stick of if you don't follow those permit conditions, you can be issued a notice of violation, and there are some fines up to $10,000 per day for failing to follow those permit conditions. We've got a number of people on here. I know they're not all from Mariposa, so here's a map of California with all of the 35 individual air districts shown. A lot of them are county-specific air districts. Some of them are regional districts, unified districts. And at the top, there's a URL, www2, not www, but www.arb.ca.gov/California-air-districts. If you go to that URL, you can look up your county and get the individual contact information for your air district. So looking at prescribed fire burn permits, each burn permits are required by state law, and they're also required by each district rules. Every district has a little bit different process for obtaining a burn permit. Some of them work with the local fire agencies and issue permitting through them. Others have their own specific process. So it's good to get to know your district folks and find out what the process is for obtaining a burn permit. Many districts will either require or allow the use of PFIRS, the Prescribed Fire Information Reporting System that Brian touched on earlier. You can submit your burn information through that portal rather than submitting a paper plan. Here in Mariposa, we require land management agencies such as Forest Service, BLM, and Yosemite National Park, as well as CAL FIRE, to submit those smoke plans through PFIRS. We will work closely with private land owners, understanding that they don't have all the same tools necessarily, and Brian may or may not be available to assist them in getting that stuff into PFIRS. But we also encourage private landowners to use the PFIRS system. Just a quick picture of what PFIRS looks like when you go to their website, and once you've logged into the system, this is a screenshot of the smoke management plan for a recent burn here in Mariposa, showing you that there are a number of, let's see, I'll get a pointer out here. All of these little box there or arrows are drop-down menus that you can click on, and they open up into a much bigger box where you fill in the project-specific information, land manager information, the landowner. This one shows the specifics, how many acres, what the duration of the burn is going to be, whether it's going to be overnight, and stuff like that. Smoke-sensitive areas is something that we look real closely at. We want to make sure you list and you know where those are, what direction they are from your burn, and approximately how far away. And then what's your plan for smoke mitigation? This area oftentimes gets left out, and that's the reason for rejecting the smoke management plan. We want the entire plan filled out. We want you to think about where the smoke's going to go and what you're going to do about it if it begins impacting a smoke-sensitive area. This is our paper version of our burn permit application. This is the application that is used by the typical homeowner. We do not require a burn permit for burning. If all you're burning is the material that originated within the 100-foot CAL FIRE clearance requirements, we don't require you to get a burn permit. We do require you to follow the burn day rules. And similar to CAL FIRE, if your fire gets away from you, that's going to be on you. We do, however, require property owners to complete this application and pay the fee if they are burning outside of that 100-foot clearance area. Mostly here we're talking about pile burning. We haven't had any instances of private property owners trying to do broadcast burning, but we certainly would encourage and entertain that for large property owners that pile burning isn't going to be a reasonable option for them. This is a copy of, or example of, our burn permit that actually gets issued. This is a burn permit that was issued earlier this year for the Sierra National Forest, and just gives the duration that the permit is good for. And the second page of the permit is the most important part of the permit, and that is our conditions, which I spoke of earlier. Conditions can be a little different for each burn, depending on who's doing the burn, where the burn's located, and such. Some of these are static. You're always going to have to give us a set 24-hour and a 72-hour notification of your burn. We want to be in contact with you. We're also looking at weather forecasts. There's a 1300 1 p.m. every day phone call that you can call into and listen to what the burn forecast and weather forecast is going to be. And burners are encouraged to participate in that. It lets other districts know what burning is going on in various areas. We require a burn summary report for every burn. Any complaints that are filed with the district, or not with the district, but with the agency that's doing the burning, oftentimes the people will call into the agency. We want to know about those complaints so we have a good idea of what's happening out there as far as people. Are they calling, especially if they're calling to complain about smoke impacts to them. We also require a test burn to be done to make sure that you're following your prescription, that the smoke is going to rise and do what you want it to do. And there's a few other notices on here. One of the specific notices that's on all of them is to just let you know that it's a violation of any air permit conditions, not to follow all of the conditions on your permit. And and another condition is that you have to follow your approved smoke management plan. So it just ties those together, so folks are not burning, saying they're going to do one level of burning in their plan, but then go off and do something else. Keeps it all tied together. So that's about it on burn permits. You can do them through our agency, contact our agency directly and get them, or if you have, go through PFERS and submit your plan through PFERS, I get an automatic notification from PFERS, and that initiates the process there. So moving on to health impacts of wildfire smoke. Short-term health effects are, as we've probably all experienced, eye irritation, upper respiratory irritation. You typically start coughing, your nose starts running. You often will get headaches, nausea, and have reduced lung function. The longer you're in the smoke, the worse these effects go on. Looking at what's in the smoke, smoke's a mixture of chemicals in the form of gases and particles or solid particles. Just a few of the gases, there's literally can be hundreds of different components in smoke, but the aldehydes, aromatic hydrocarbons, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and such. And then the big ones are also particles. Various sized ash and smoke particles are in there, and then particulate matter, or PM 2.5, is of the most concern to us from an air district standpoint and from a health standpoint. Looking at some of the chemicals, the short-term symptoms include stinging, tearing eyes, nausea, and vomiting. Long-term chronic exposures can lead to respiratory disease. Benzene, we all know about benzene and its cancer-causing agents. But short-term symptoms are, headaches, dizziness, nausea, just some of the typical things that we see as a result of smoke exposure. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons can cause and lead to cardiovascular problems. And then carbon monoxide is in there, and which reduces oxygen transport to the blood, causes headaches, loss of mental acuity, motor skills, stresses our hearts, may actually cause angina. In extreme cases, carbon monoxide poisoning will cause coma and death. And the amount of CO is directly proportional to the amount of particulate matter in the air. So if you're looking at heavy smoke, you can rest assured that there's going to be a heavy amount of carbon monoxide in there too. So we talked a little bit about PM 2.5, just to give you a graphical idea of how small that is. That's particulate matter that is 2.5 microns in diameter or smaller. Fine beach sand is 90 microns. The human hair shown here, 50 to 70 microns. Those blue dots around the human hair, PM10, which dust, pollen, mold. Blowing dust is typically PM10, which you see down in the valley. And then you've got those little tiny red dots that are the PM 2.5. The problem with PM 2.5 compared to the other size particles is shown here in the respiratory system. Those other coarse particles, PM10 and above, are typically taken out in the upper respiratory system. Our bodies are designed to deal with those. They fall out very quickly or are trapped very quickly in our nasal passages, in the cilia, in our bronchial tubes, and in the larger bronchial tube areas of the lungs. However, the small particles, those 2.5 particles, can actually get deep down into the lungs and carry some of these chemicals that are attached to them, along with the gases, deep down into your lungs. Those ultrafine particles, as we call PM 2.5, are definitely a contributor to cardiovascular disease. And anytime there's a heavy smoke event, we see increased number of people not only going to the hospital with asthma and other lung issues, COPD and stuff, but ending up in the emergency room with heart attacks. So that brings us back to the first slide that I threw up there, our policy implications and why we need to change the policy to protect public health. And continue to promote as an air district, promote the carefully planned and permitted prescribed burns. And with that, here's my contact information, and we can move into questions.
Thanks, Dave, for that great presentation, for sharing us all the health implications of smoke. I guess we move on to the questions. Also in the process, we're going to be posting some polls that you guys can fill for us while we answer these questions. So I'm just going to go through the questions. I'll try to at least have both Brian and Dave kind of answering these questions together or go back and forth. So the first question is about cultural burning and native tribes. So the first question is, how are most likely descendants or tribes consulted regarding VMP archaeological reports?
That sounds like a Brian question. So
Yes,
each county has a Native American contact list published, and so the Native American groups just apply to us to be on that list. And for all counties, we contact the Native American Heritage Council. But such as here in Mariposa County, the Native American group that actually is signed up to be contacted is in Madera County. So we make the contact according to the Native American contact list. We start with a first letter that says, hey, we're going to be proposing a project in this area. It includes maps and descriptions. Are you aware of anything that you would like to disclose to us so we can better protect it? And then if our archaeological record search or our field surveys identify unidentified things we didn't know about, then we send a second letter, describe what we've found either through the record search or on the ground. And again, do they have something that they would help us figure out to do to protect those during our project, whether it's burning or we're going to have heavy equipment out on the site.
Okay, thank you. The next question along the same lines, it's about a couple of them, but kind of similar in what they want you to respond to, Brian. Is the enhancement of cultural significant plants, oaks, basket plants, a sub-goal of the VMP? And they also want to know, Bert also wants to understand if they can apply for a VMP to be done on small acres, like 5 acres.
So the first one, establish and maintain desired plant communities, was one of the sub-goals. So if those plant communities include basketry materials or something like that, then that would fit really well within that desired plant communities sub-goal. For Bert's question, typically if someone was going to be doing a traditional burn, they want to do that burn themselves. And so if it was the winter season, that can be done, at least in Mariposa County, without a permit from CAL FIRE, or if it is fire season, then that would be typically an LE7 permit. For 5 acres, it would be unusual for us to do a VMP. As I mentioned, the last VMP we had signed took us 21 years to get through. So a lot of work for a very small property. We would probably encourage them, hey, are you really talking traditional burns? You don't want bulldozers out there. Can you do it yourself? And here we'll help you identify some conditions to help you do that safely.
Okay. There's also a question about the minimum size of area that can be applied for VMPs, and another one that asks if several landowners can join together and request a VMP to be created for multiple owners.
The second part, yes. In fact, if it's small landowners or multiple landowners around, say for an example, our Greeley Hill burn included over 1,000 acres of BLM land, public lands, but to burn that, really the safest way for all of us to burn that is to put some of the fire lines on the private lands that surround that. So we might have a dozen private parcels around a larger parcel just to make a more feasible project. But if several smaller landowners were to all agree together, yeah, here's a project, we only own part of this bowl or basin or ridge, whatever the landform, but we'd like to put the project across all of it. Yes, we certainly have and expect multiple landowners on those VMP projects.
Okay. And for lands that are burned under the VMP, who takes up the liability if fire escapes or issues like that? Who is responsible for the liability issues?
I saw a couple of questions, several questions along that line. First of all, I wanted to correct, if you're burning under an LE7, that is the landowner's responsibility. We can be there to observe or assist, but it is not our burn. It is all liability on whoever's lighting that fire. Now, the first question you read to me was regarding a VMP. Once you're under a RM75 agreement, the state takes all responsibility and liability.
Okay.
There was some fine print in one of those slides that said, you know, if it burns some of your private property, there is a claim process for that.
Okay. I'm not sure about this one, but maybe you can kind of understand it better than I do. But how do you have the agreement and talk with landowners to burn the area in private land?
So there's a couple of scenarios. The one that we kind of prefer is that when we set our strategic goals in our fire plan, like now currently we have a fuel break that goes from Tuolumne County all the way to Fresno County. And so if your property is part of that, we are going to be approaching you and say, hey, are you willing to enter into an agreement for us, whether it's strictly for mechanical treatments or is burn appropriate on that. And so this first scenario is we come to you because you've got a strategic and tactical part of our unit. The other is, and several of these come in, that, hey, we've got what we think is a significant strategic portion of your unit. It might not touch your primary fuel break, but we think that it has these values not only to our parcel, but to our neighbors, and we'd like you to consider it.
Okay. So this one is about announcing burns. CAL FIRE does not include the use of Nexel for their burn. Thereby, landowners near the burn routinely have no notice of these burns. Why is public notice via this great program not used?
I can't speak too far out on the public information officer's behalf, but as I understand, Nixle is operated by one of our cooperators, and they would be part of our notifications ahead of the burn. So going forward, I can encourage that we include Nixle in our public information plan.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We may want to do that from the Air District side also.
Okay, thanks for both of you.
And of course, Dave will support PFERS and that people can look at it and see where burns are planned and when.
Okay, so the other one is about areas burned under training. Are they exempt from CEQA?
We have to be a little bit careful when we say exempt from CEQA. As I mentioned, there are CEQA exemptions. So for certain types of activities that have already been analyzed and found to be not significant impacts, we often do training burns under one of those exemptions, which is minor modification of land or fuel. And so typically in our training burns, the landowner, whether it's Caltrans or whether we're out on a private ranch, they'll do the earthwork. And so the Department of Forestry is not doing any ground disturbing activities, and we will just go out and do the ignition and the holding. So our part of it is a very light touch on the land, and so we fit under that minor alteration to land and vegetation.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about permitting. The question is, prescribed burn permitting depends on county and air quality district. How do I know where to start an application
So
in
Dave,
a particular area? So this one is for both of you guys.
yeah, Dave answered part of that already with the URL where you can look up your contacts in your county.
Mm-hmm.
And anywhere you are in the state of California, you can contact your local CAL FIRE office and get hooked up with the VMP coordinator for the unit. Again, for Madera, Mariposa, and Merced counties, that's me. Dave?
And certainly here in Mariposa, it would be me at the numbers I put up earlier. And as Brian mentioned, contact your local air district. If you don't know who that local air district is, you can look it up on ARB's website that I gave the URL earlier. You can look back at that after on the recording.
Okay. And then there's the question about completing burn plans. One question was, are we supposed to create them or fill them out, or are there any local businesses that can create these burn plans and complete the burn services for landowners?
I'll have to tease that out in a couple of different questions. The first part is all VMPs land on my desk. They're generated from me. I show the different components just so landowners can understand what kind of information we're going to have to gather. Some of that we do out on site ourselves, whether we have our environmental scientist going out and looking for particular species or habitats, or whether we are asking the landowners, hey, what do you know about that's out here? So yeah, all of that is, all of the VMP and the VTP is done right here at my desk. So the other part of the question was what contractors are available. You can, under an LE7, contract for for-profit, such as Firestorm, or partner with maybe Trex or a nonprofit, and the landowners and their contractor or cooperator can do the burn under the LE7 with LE8 conditions.
Okay. I don't know if we've kind of touched on this one, but I just wanted you to make sure that we cover this one as well. From Margot, if a landowner requests participation in the VMP and CAL FIRE assumes liability, who does the actual burn? Am I correct to understand that the landowner has an LE7? Do they do the broadcast burn and CAL FIRE assumes liability?
Yeah, under an LE7, CAL FIRE has no liability. That is all on the landowner, or if they've contracted, you know, on their cooperator. But under a VMP, we will go out, we will work with the landowner on the preparation. Often the larger ranches will have their own dozer. They'll prepare all the fire lines for us. Or if we're touching a lot of smaller parcels, then we'll be out with our equipment doing that preparation. But under VMP, it is our employees that are out with the torches. So we're doing the ignitions, and we are the assuming all the liability under a VMP. Landowner, all liability under an LE7.
Okay. And a question from Carol: how can we schedule a broadcast burn in the fall during the brief period of time when burn permits are allowed and green vegetation moisture content is still low enough for a successful burn?
Just like any other time of the year, if it is during the permitted burn season, you can burn your own under the typical pile burning permit, or the LE5 for non-conforming piles, or the LE7 for broadcast. And then if it's a VMP, we're going to be working with you on the timing. Maybe you've got cattle on some of your pastures and you don't want it burned. We've got certain windows that we burn certain things for. So if we're trying to burn Medusa head, we might be trying to burn in May or June. But if we're just trying to burn out thatch, then it's fine to graze that first, as long as there's enough fuel left that the fire will carry through and reach the thatch reduction objectives. You know, that can be after the grazing season. We can do that in the fall when the moisture's back up.
Okay.
And from the Air District side, we would work with you in trying to help you find a burn window. We, through the PFERS, there's a projection up to 96 hours ahead to see what that burn window is going to be, and even in some cases can work with you on marginal days if we're coming into a better dispersal time. One of the things that we took to the Board of Supervisors last year was allowing agency type burns and larger landowner burns to start on marginal days, which are typically no burn days. But as long as we're moving into better conditions, if the burn is going to take more than one day, we would allow and work with a property owner for that.
Okay.
And it's probably time for me to mention here that's something that kind of falls in the crease between Dave's concerns and my concerns. A good day for Dave for a burn day is very different than a good day for me for a burn day. So the air quality districts are looking for smoke dispersal. That happens best under unstable atmospheric conditions where the air is going up and mixing away. But to us, that means typically breezy conditions. And so harder to hold a fire on many good smoke dispersal days.
Okay.
So we like really dry material because it produces less smoke. So July's a really good time to burn material for air quality purposes.
And we try and meet in the middle where we're meet both of our objectives.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's never easy, is it? And then there's a question that talks about, you mentioned about 20 plus years time frame to get the VMP permit. Do you anticipate time to decrease moving forward?
With the new VTP, that's going to be very slow for the first few because it's a brand new process. But yeah, we have, gosh, 15 projects in our hopper right now. And so as we do part of one, and then we might have a wait period, such as some of our notifications require a 30-day wait period, wait for a response. You know, we try and keep all the balls in the air. And, you know, if you watch the juggler with the hatchet and the torch and the apple, you know, hopefully you take a bite of the apple as part of your show and, you know, keep the right things going, do the right parts at the right time and keep everything moving.
Okay.
Don't bite the torch.
Okay. And then there's this question about public input. Does the public or state have input on prescribed fire use and vegetation management on federal lands? There's a push to use private logging for a main form of vegetation management on federal lands. Near where I live, can prescribed fire and tree removal complement each other while preserving environmental and health objectives? I guess both of you can answer this. Maybe Susie, you can add to this as well if you have anything to add.
I'm looking for that one in writing because there was a lot of it.
Yeah, so essentially it's asking, can public have an input on what kind of vegetation management tools are used on federal lands? And what do you think about both prescribed fire and tree removal being part of a vegetation management program on federal lands?
So typically
So I can take part of
go ahead,
that.
Dave.
And so federal lands go through a process similar to the CEQA process that Brian talked about earlier, called NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, and it does have a process for public input. However, typically these plans are long-range plans, so you need to get in on the beginning of the plan to be part of that that process.
And there's several layers of those plans. Just recently, the Sierra National Forest went through their forest plan. So, they're kind of 20-year plan, but they'll also have project level plans. And so every few years, they'll be doing maybe an environmental assessment for a particular basin and how it's going to be managed. So those are the opportunities. And you just want to work with your local forest, whether it's in Sonora or Clovis for us, for the Sierra and the Stanislaus, or even, the county touches the Inyo National Forest, so maybe over there too. But then there's also the district offices, which are in North Fork and up in Groveland. And so just meet with the staff there or contact the staff there, find out what you can comment on as plans are coming through. They do have more automated ways to review and comment on plans now.
Okay. Susie, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I actually was typing my answer in to Carol, but my answer was mostly about the NEPA process and identifying where your forest is. And as the others said, you can be asked to be put on a notice schedule for their actions coming up for the next 5 years, or on a planning process notice. So they do vigorous public involvement. So there is that opportunity for all of us to be involved in how national and public lands are managed. So we would encourage you to do that.
Okay.
That's it for me.
Thank you. And this question is for Dave. Are air quality or smoke management policies being revised to allow for more prescribed burns to take place? If yes, what time frame are we looking at for them to take effect?
So that is air district specific. However, in an effort to meet the state's goals of more prescribed burning, the state hung a carrot out there to the air districts and gave us money to put together a prescribed fire program and to work on prescribed fire and encourage the prescribed fires. So that is, happening right now. Most air districts, at least in Central to Northern California, are heavily promoting prescribed fire right now.
Okay, thank you. There was a question that Susie answered. Do any of you have any idea what burn would look like next year, since Forest Service canceled burning as a result of COVID this year? Do you just want to summarize maybe what is in that link, Susie?
Sure. And I just responded to let the questioner know that Region 5 of the Forest Service has actually reinstated their burning in the last week or two. And so they were on hiatus, but they're moving forward with prescribed burns. The others may want to comment more directly on the effects of COVID-19 on prescribed burning, but California has decided to continue to move forward on that at the state level.
Yeah, the fire control and the project work have all been deemed essential by the governor, so it's been pretty much business as usual with distancing as we can allow. But as someone asked me last week, yeah, every morning we put 4 firefighters in an engine and they ride together to every call. You might see our hand crews out on the project in masks where they aren't able to maintain an appropriate distance, but we are out and working. Beyond Camp has 5 crews out on projects all the business days.
Okay.
And, you know, for just what's coming down the pike, we expect to have our Highway 41 burn down in Madera County in maybe about 3 weeks. Looks like the grass is drying up nicely for that. We will be doing some Medusa head reduction burns in early and late June, depending on the elevations of the projects there. We expect to do some training burns out at McClure Point ahead of their fireworks. Whether they continue with those or not, we still expect to burn the units that we've prepared out there and train our crews, as I mentioned earlier, on ignition and holding and plant preparation and all those things. Early in the season, our new firefighters get fire on the ground in our training burns. So we are continuing.
Okay, thank you. And then there's this question, can you say more about what public education efforts for residential individual houses to community settings with regards to trying to inform homeowners of the benefits of prescribed fire over negatives of increased catastrophic wildfires? I just want to say this whole series and more workshops that we have planned under this project that we're running, is I would say it's definitely part of that effort to educate people towards the benefits of bringing back prescribed fire on our landscapes. And then there was someone who actually, I think, was kind of responding to the same question, who says maybe with initiatives, programs that have been created, like the home ignition zone assessment, as avenues for public education. If anyone else has anything to add, please go ahead.
Well, certainly for our homeowners.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm going to go first, Dave. For our local homeowners, you know, we do expect them to maintain their own defensible space. And so that's a start on their property. The education, you know, our logo's on the bottom. CAL FIRE is funding this outreach through the universities. And so we're out here working, getting the message out.
And there's the local Fire Safe Council that has education information for people, but that brings up a good point, as possibly we can look at utilizing some of our prescribed fire grant funding to do community information on the benefits of prescribed fire.
Thank you.
And this is Susie. Can I just add, Mariposa County, our extension folks there have developed a website with lots of great resources for anybody interested. And I'm sure we'll put that in the chat box, and we would encourage everyone to check them out.
And we did have grant proposals this year for some of the fire safe communities. And we expect, you know, much more activity on that, where neighborhoods band together, contract with each other to put in a certain amount of effort for their community and protect their community, you know, together that way from the inside.
Okay, thank you. And we have a couple of questions left. Maybe before I go through those, Max, maybe can you close that poll and put up the exit poll for us? And I just want to remind everyone to, when you sign out, to fill out our survey. We'll greatly appreciate that, because that will help us at least improve these webinars or workshops that we plan to do as we continue with this effort of educating people on the benefits of prescribed fire. Okay, so the second last question here is, what is the timeline of getting an LE7 approved?
As I mentioned, those are non-discretionary. You come in if you have the information filled out. Well, not in person right now, but call ahead and we'll make arrangements for that. But we just fill that out, and we might have to have a site visit for conditions for our LE8, but it's pretty quick. So we don't have to do any CEQA because the action is being taken by the private landowner or their agents.
Okay. And then there's this last one. I'm not sure if it's a question. And then project planning, post-fire BMPs, after a wildfire, BLM might resort to, I guess it was someone was trying to respond to one of the questions, I think.
Well, at the very end, he asks, or she, I don't, Bud, so probably a he, asks, what BMPs does CAL FIRE look for or require? After giving a whole list of...
we talked about our checklist, and so being able to avoid impacts, and then the watershed BMPs are some of our highest priorities. So trying to keep the mountain on the mountain and the water clear in the valley. Whether that means putting in water bars on any tractor lines at certain distances spacing for certain slopes, depending on our erosion hazard rating, whatever we need to do that. We typically aren't going to burn something and then cover it with a Kerlex blanket or something like that. So.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, everyone. To respond to this last question that just came in, we have the first presentation posted on our YouTube channel. Max can put the URL on the chat box here to let you know where to get that information. And the same thing with this one, we're going to post it on our YouTube channel as well, so people can go back and get more information as you need. So I think that's it for today. Thanks everyone for attending, and we really appreciate you being here. So next week again on Wednesday at 10 a.m. we have our third session, and that's going to focus on planning for prescribed fire. So if you guys can come back and join us, we really appreciate you having here and your interest in this information. That's it for today.
And we do appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Brian and Dave, for all the information that you provided. We really appreciate you coming and helping with these presentations.
Thanks for having this after having to cancel the workshop. I think this was a great forum.
Yes, way more at least presence of people here. So hopefully we can continue to use a similar format going forward as well.
And Melinda didn't plug it, but do check out the Mariposa Resource Conservation District YouTube for fuel reduction videos.
That is true. Thanks for sharing that, Brian.